Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Freelancers Show. This is episode 330, and today we're going to be talking about how to handle interviews as a freelancer. And today on the panel, we have Jeremy Green.
Hey, everybody.
And I am Erik Dietrich. And that is it for the panel today. So let's dive into it.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
So this question actually came from a Slack that I'm in, and it was kind of interesting. I was soliciting show topics, and somebody chimed in and basically asked about the subject of interviews, and they phrased it in a way, basically, how do I handle stump the chump tech interviews that you have to endure to get contracts? And for those of you who don't know what that means, a stump the chump interview is kind of a less than friendly term for the sorts of interviews that tech companies do where they're asking you about like algorithms and whiteboards and language syntax trivia and such.
Where so they ask you to manually reverse a linked list so that you can get a job tweaking CSS.
Exactly. I don't think probably either of us has necessarily the strongest opinion or the best opinion of that practice, but at any rate, so the question is, well, how do you handle that as a freelancer? And I think that's a pretty interesting question, and there's a lot to unpack because the question presupposes that that's part of the freelancing process in the first place, which I don't know that I would. But so there's kind of the tactical question of how do you handle that if you're in the mix? And then maybe the broader question of should you be doing that? But we can maybe get to that later. So I guess, I don't know, do you want to tackle first up, like how do you handle that sort of thing?
Sure. It can be hard. I think, sometimes the existence of the stump the chump interview, to me, I will see as a red flag kind of in and of itself. It sort of indicates to me that the client isn't viewing me as a competent professional that is going to be able to understand some business problems and help them find solutions to them. It indicates that they are viewing me as a pair of hands that is going to do some work, and they want to, verify that I have all this trivia memorized such that I never have to go look up anything. And I also think that it sort of betrays a fundamental misunderstanding about how most of programming is actually accomplished on a day-to-day basis. There are dozens, hundreds of topics that I know well enough to know how to craft a good Google search for it, but not that I know well enough to be able to rattle off everything perfectly off the top of my head. And in my opinion, that is totally fine. I think I would be doing myself and my clients a disservice if I tried to do all of this stuff by memory, because it can be very complex. There's a lot of ins and outs. In my opinion, looking some stuff up, going to read the API docs when you need to is not a bad thing. And there's no need to discourage that. And so that said, sometimes in interviews, I will try to say basically that, say, okay, I know that I'm not going to get all the details of this right because it's the type of thing that I would normally go look up. But here's what I can talk about just off the top of my head. And here are, terms that I would use to be able to search for to find exactly what I needed to be able to make progress if I was being blocked by this. I think that's kind of my first take at how to handle that sort of thing. What about you, Eric?
So you just said something in there that reminded me of a great quote I saw the other day. I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but it was basically like, programmer, your brain isn't meant to be like a repository for all of these facts. It's meant to serve as an index so that you know where to go Google for them.
Absolutely.
So I think the easy answer for me is if I were faced with something like this at this point in my life and career, I just like wouldn't do it. But like, I'm going to maybe walk it back in time to a point where I would have. And I'm with you. I would have been very leery of this because it indicates, yes, like as you're saying that you're being considered as a pair of hands. But I'll even expand on that to say, I think it also indicates that, like, if you look at this from a business perspective and you're running your own freelance business, it indicates that they view your business as a complete commodity. And so they're kind of interviewing you, which is like the equivalent of going through like the vendor acquisition process or like vetting partners or whatever. It's a race to the bottom. Like they're sort of, think of it as like a request for proposals, and there's you and there's all sorts of other people, and they're putting you all through a bunch of hoops because they really can't tell the difference. You're commodity labor to them. So in that situation, I would kind of look at this and think to myself, do I need this work that is almost certainly going to look like long-range pseudo-employment? Because like you don't interview strategic vendor partners, so to speak. You interview people where you have a job description and for whatever reason, you're filling it with a contractor instead of a full-time employee. And so I'd take stock of that situation. How much do I need this work? And the answer might be a lot, especially if you're just getting started. And then I'd kind of look at my other options and probably try to prefer those if instead of these types of gotcha interviews, they were doing something more along the lines of having more traditional interviews that were actual conversations about business value and stuff. So I guess that's a long way of saying that my absolute default preference would be to avoid this kind of thing at all costs for a variety of reasons. If I were in the middle of it, I guess I would try to do my best and work on my prospects, assuming I landed that job, in the evenings or what have you. It's just hard to put myself back there exactly, because even as a software engineer that was employed, I stayed away from those types of interviews.
Yeah, and I mean, that sort of, the stump the chump variety can kind of be hard to see coming because it just is couched as, hey, we're going to do a tech interview. And, tech interviews that focus on sort of bigger picture stuff, how would you handle architecting this kind of a problem? Or, if you ran into this sort of a problem, what sort of changes do you think could be made in the system to improve it? Those sort of answers might be designed to figure out if somebody's familiar with caching strategies or, not necessarily not alternatives to MVC, but like ways that you augment MVC patterns, stuff like that. And so there are, certainly brands of tech interviews that I think are very useful, but they're really hard to differentiate from the stump the chump interview kind of ahead of time, and you don't know until you're in it. And so it's hard to know that, oh man, I should have studied up on syntax of JavaScript last night, or whatever the thing is. And so yeah, it can be hard to prepare and do anything ahead of time because you don't know it's coming until it's there.
Yeah, that is pretty opaque from outside. One thing that pops into my head is if you find yourself, and this requires, some nerves of steel, but if you find yourself in that situation, you might kind of gently put a halt to it and say, listen, I am, kind of more of a specialist. I tend to solve a more specialized set of problems, and I like to be in conversations about business value with clients. So I feel like maybe we've gotten our wires crossed somewhere here, but this, if you're vetting candidates this way, you're typically looking for somebody that's kind of more of a pair of hands or more granular. I'm freewheeling with this a little bit, but if you have a stock thing like that to say prepared, it's kind of a Hail Mary, but like if you're going to fail this awkward thing anyway, it might be a way to sort of level set and reframe the conversation a bit, where they're probably not going to say, oh, okay, you're hired, but it might shift how they think of you, and it might actually shade subsequent conversations where maybe they're not finding the person they want, and then they give you a call back and say, hey, let's talk a little more. Pretty unlikely, but you never know, and I don't think you have anything to lose if, especially if you feel like it's not going to go well.
Yeah, for sure. And, depending on the outrageousness of the stump the chump question, you may even just ask, is this actually relevant to the position that I'm interviewing for? I was under the assumption that I'm here to talk about working in Ruby on Rails for you guys, which is a memory managed language, and there's no reason that you would be maintaining your own linked list and need to reverse it. Is that something that you guys actually do? And, is that part of this job? If so, I may have gotten the wrong idea of what you're looking for. That's not always gonna pass, because if you're interviewing for, to be a JavaScript contractor and they're grilling you on some of the finer points of how JavaScript handles things that may or may not be numbers, it's a little harder to say, well, that has no bearing on any of the work that I would be doing, but is also still a stump the chump type question.
I don't know if you're like me, but when I have a new idea, I probably spend an hour looking for a domain that communicates the right thing to the right people so that they know what I'm about. And that's why I've picked up as a sponsor the .tech domains, and you should definitely check them out. There's never been a domain that's helped represent the tech community so well. Getting a domain that's relevant to your brand, that helps encapsulate the ethos of what you're doing, is it's hard. And the .coms a lot of times are taken up, and so having a .tech is really, really awesome. Now, I have actually picked up devchat.tech. We have a lot of SEO behind devchat.tv, so it probably won't switch, but I wanted that out there so that people can pick it up and know that devchat is about tech. And I love the idea. So using a .tech domain was an awesome solution for us. It's short, it's relevant to what we do. It just sticks in people's head. It's a natural fit for anything technology. So if you're a programmer, if you're working on a tech startup or an open source library or things like that, it's definitely a great way to go. In fact, a lot of other companies have actually been moving over to .tech. So CES, which is a conference that I go to every year, and go check out all the new technology, they switched over to CES.tech from cesweb.org. Viacom has Viacom.tech to host their tech division. Intel chose Insight.tech for their latest initiative. Startups on a tech domain have raised more than $1 billion on a .tech domain. So if you want your own .tech domain, go to go.tech/freelancer and use the coupon code freelancer.tech and get a 1-year tech domain at $9.99 and a 5-year .tech domain at $49.99. Now, if you use this coupon code to get a .tech domain, tweet at me at CMaxW and let me know what .tech domain you got so that I can shout it out on Twitter. I'd really love to see what you're doing with this, and I think it's just a great product. So go check it out at go.tech/freelancer and get this deal today.
Yeah, I think as we're discussing that, it strikes me that if you're thinking in terms of, your freelance business, if you're in this situation, who is your buyer and who is your contact there? Who are you engaging with? And the answer, if somebody's administering stuff like this, is probably some kind of tech lead, at least to the who are you engaged with. The buyer might be a whole department or a VP somewhere that you're probably not even going to talk to. And so I think maybe it's worth transitioning into this discussion over the course of the long haul. Do you want to be doing technical interviews, or do you want to be shifting to a situation where maybe you have a different buyer, a different person that you're pitching to, and you're having different kinds of conversations with prospects? What are your takes on that? Do you find yourself doing technical interviews these days, or do you have different sorts of introductions to clients?
I don't do a lot of technical interviews anymore. I often am, I generally have enough word of mouth business coming my way that uh, I've already come highly recommended on the technology side, and it usually comes down to, what is the business relationship going to look like? There definitely will be some, sort of macro tech discussions just about, the generalities of their stack, and, make sure that I actually have some familiarity with the things that they're using or intend to use. But it's been a long time since I've had a real stump the chump type interview. And I've even had, and to the point of, you ideally want to be able to avoid those interviews. One way to avoid that is to set yourself up to where you do have inbound leads coming to you saying, hey, we're pretty confident we could use your help. And just kind of a little anecdote to illustrate what I'm talking about there. Some number of years ago, I gave a talk at RailsConf about using OAuth to be able to begin splitting a big monolithic project into services, and how you can use that to just, pull off one little thing that you're going to implement this new thing as a service that just can integrate with your monolith, but isn't directly embedded in it. And I've had a couple of leads come to me just from that talk saying, hey, we saw your talk. We think you can help us. Let's talk. And one of those even explicitly called out in one of our very first meetings, said, there's no need for us to do a tech interview. I saw your talk. I know that you know what you're talking about. We just have to figure out if we can work together and if we can meet on a price that everybody's happy with. And so that's, that was fantastic. That's really good because the buyers come in hot. They're ready to buy. I don't have to really do much convincing. It's just, yeah, sure, let's figure out how we can work together. And that also kind of turns it around to where it makes it easy for me to frame things in, okay, I need to make sure that you're a good fit for me. And, that's sort of a long-winded anecdote about how building visible public authority can really help level up the types of conversations that you have with prospects.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's making me think that like a good way to reason through the health of your business, as a freelancer, solo consultant, whatever you want to call it, if you start to think of all of these things, like I would advise anyway, even if you're doing stump the chump interviews, maybe stop thinking of them as interviews and start thinking of them as sales conversations, because interviews is what somebody who is a salaried employee does to get a job. Sales conversations are what people who are business owners do in order to get business. And when you start thinking of it that way versus like other sales conversations that you're more experienced with or more familiar with, the stump the chump interview is perhaps the worst imaginable sales conversation you could be having, because you have two parties. One of them clearly has all of the power and is saying to the other one, we have you and we have all these other kind of undifferentiated laborers that we can't really tell the difference between. So here's this sort of obstacle course you have to jump through, and whichever one of you does that the best will get a call back. And the rest of you, you're lucky if we bother to tell you not. Like, so if you start thinking of that as your sales conversation, you start to think, how could I have better sales conversations? And as Jeremy is pointing out here, like inbound marketing is an excellent way to start upping the sales conversation game. I love that anecdote. Hey, we don't even need to bother to do a tech interview. We can see that you know what you're doing. And so there's a couple of things I think are going on there. Is one, you've got authority that's established, by giving that talk. And then two, somebody attending not only sees that you're capable, but they also see that there's business value to something you're doing. Yes, I want this monolith broken up, to make things more flexible or what have you. So you are capable of doing something that I can see will help our bottom line. So let's talk about that. Whereas if you're in the stump the chump situation, somebody somewhere has already figured out all the business value and they could not care less about your opinion about business value. You're just there to do a very specific piece of execution. So I guess all of this I'm saying is a way to like kind of look to the horizon, even if you're in the middle of it, you've worked 9 to 5 maybe for a lot of your career and have gone freelance, and all you've known is interviews. This might be a helpful way to make it clear that there is a world where you're not getting work this way. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think that should be a goal. Like maybe this is a slightly aggressive take on it, but like, I feel like, I don't know exactly what the exit criteria is, but I feel like after, 2 years or something on your own, that you probably don't want to be doing things resembling interviews too often anymore, that you should be having different kinds of sales conversations. And your mileage may vary on that timing, because if you need work, you got to do what you got to do.
Yep, you do. Yeah, and one thing that you said there just kind of made me realize that in our opening section about how to handle the Stump the Chump interviews, I think that even the Stump the Chump interviews sort of come in 2 flavors. Some is definitely the obstacle course type that you mentioned, where they're just looking for right answers, and if you don't give them the answers they want, that you're being docked points essentially. But I think there is another variety that happens sometimes where they are hoping to stump you so that they can see what your thought patterns look like and get a feel for what you do when you're stumped or blocked. And those, if you're in one of those saying, I don't know the answer to this, but here's how I would go about finding it, that will earn you points. But by the same token, saying exactly that same thing, if you're in the obstacle course type, is probably going to dock you points. But in either scenario, I think you probably get docked even more points if you just try to BS your way through it. And it's obvious to the person that you're talking to that you're just BSing instead of being willing to say, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I would never BS my way through anything, because if I think of kind of the, I guess, real politic of this, if you will, if you try to BS your way through it, you're almost conceding your own inadequacy, versus like if I were in an interview, like if I found myself in such a situation and I were being grilled on something and I didn't think it was relevant, maybe I'm being asked to do some pointer arithmetic in a managed language or something. And if I say, I don't know that, but I thought we were talking about a managed language, then you're in your own way kind of staying true to your actual knowledge. You're not trying to pull one over on anyone. In fact, you're saying, I don't even know that I think this question is valid. So I think that there ought to be, in anything you're doing, an underlying confidence in yourself and your skills. And that can seem hard to drum up if you're struggling to find work, but like, you are good enough, stuff. It might be that this particular thing isn't a fit, but I wouldn't, it's just not a good look in any way to try to make things up or fake your way through it. So yeah, at the very tactical level, please don't do that.
Yeah, that will shoot your credibility faster than almost anything you can do. It's, you're getting off on proving that you are fine with lying to your prospect or customer if you feel like that's what will make you look the best. And nobody who's looking for help with their business wants that.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess if we're looking at, the idea of how do you get to a better quality of interview? How do you get to a better quality of sales conversations? Like you had mentioned doing some marketing and looking for inbound leads. Like, do you have other ideas for things that have moved you along to maybe where you're having more genuine sales conversations and fewer sort of asymmetrical qualifying interviews?
I think various steps that I've taken to kind of build authority and raise my visibility have helped. Giving talks at local meetups has certainly helped some local inbound leads come my way. Giving talks at national level and international level conferences has resulted in leads coming my way. Just attending conferences and talking to people and hearing what sort of problems they've had has helped a lot. One thing that I think can be useful is a lot of conferences will have a opportunities board or jobs board. And they're not always for people looking for full-time employment. You can find a lot of posts on there where people are looking for contractors to help with short-term projects, stuff like that. And I think if you can actually catch the people that are from those companies that are representing them at the conference and talk to them at the conference, that sort of changes the nature of the interactions that you have with them versus if you had just, found a job posting on GitHub Jobs and put in the web form that's the interview. It gives you a chance to really talk to them sort of outside of their prescribed, company mandated processes and kind of present yourself as, hey, I'm sure I could help you guys, but I need to know more about what you're doing to make sure that you're a good fit for me so that you will get the most value out of it. And just being able to start a conversation in that way, I think changes the perception that the prospect has of you versus the web form.
Yeah, that actually reminded me of sort of an element of pre-qualification. Like you were talking about having this happen at a conference, and I started to think, so if you're at that conference, especially if you're a speaker or something, and you encounter that board and you respond in some way, whether by directly approaching somebody or what have you, there is an element, I guess, of pre-qualification there, I would think. And it reminded me of, I used to do training videos for pluralsight.com. And I got some leads through the Pluralsight organization for some of the things that I had made videos about. And when I was called in to do that consulting, there was no sort of semblance of an interview. There was kind of this element of, I'm trying to remember, I had done one about static code analysis. And so a couple of companies called looking for static code analysis work, and they didn't bring me in and, have some architect ask me if I know what cyclomatic complexity is. Instead, they came at it from, the perspective of, we can see based on what you've done out there in the world, this is a pre-qualifying thing. Mm-hmm. So let's just talk about how you might be able to help us. So I guess if you're in kind of stump the chump sorts of interviews, I don't know exactly how you work your way to that, but if you're building training material, putting yourself out there somehow, giving talks, then the leads that come in through those things are going to be naturally less inclined to sort of put you through the standard rigmarole of filtering candidates. So that's a great point, I think.
Hey, folks, I found a terrific tool for planning out your projects and setting timelines. It's actually terrific. If you've ever used a Gantt chart before, it's based on that, but it's got a whole lot of other great features. It's an interactive online project management tool for people who love planning with timelines and Gantt charts. The thing that I like about it is that I can actually plan things out and I can get a tentative timeline for what's going on. And then it's got a simple UI with drag and drop capabilities that make it really easy for me to adjust the timeline, and it'll automatically adjust everything else based on what is dependent on what is dependent on what. And it's terrific. So the online process and learning curve are really, really short. It's a terrific fit for both individual freelancers and for teams. Project coordinators love the simple planning and other great features like workload, task assignments, deadlines, critical path, baseline. Teams use it for online collaboration. You can leave comments, you can attach files, you can send notifications, the whole 9 yards. It integrates with Jira if you're using Jira. But the other killer feature for me was that you can actually switch it over and you can see it in a Kanban board view, which is awesome. You can get a 14-day trial at ganttpro.com. You can also use their software development project template if that's what you're into. And that's at ganttpro.com/software-development-plan-template. And if you use the code devchat, you can get $50 off for using Gantt Pro. So go check it out at ganttpro.com.
Yeah, anything you can do to kind of circumvent the weed out process that a lot of companies have is going to help, because if you're at the point where you are applying to, let's say, a job that somebody posted on Dice or LinkedIn or something, chances are that company is just being flooded with low quality applicants. And once that flood starts, their only rational way to deal with it is to find any metric at all by which they can rule some people out so that they have a smaller pool of people that they actually have to evaluate. And I think it's that weed out process that can be a driver of the stump the chump interview. It's not always. I've seen companies that struggle to even get people to apply that still do the stump the chump interview because for some reason they think it's the right way to do. It's like, oh, I had to go through this hazing when I got this job, so everybody else does too.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I spent a lot of years doing IT management consulting, and a lot of times I'm going into enterprises and different pockets of organizations, and usually when I was showing up there, it wasn't because they wanted to tell me how great everything was. And some of that would involve redesigning org charts or helping them with their hiring policies. And I can certainly remember times where they were doing these kind of draconian interview processes that reminded me of, what a hot Silicon Valley firm might do. And when I'd ask them about that, like, hey, you seem to be having trouble with both attrition and hiring. What are you doing here? It would be, well, this is how Google hires or whatever. So we're mimicking that. And I'd say, well, you're not Google. I'm not sure why you're doing that. So yeah, that as an aside, you will get firms that are doing things like that in sort of cargo cultish fashion, which kind of just goes back to speaking to why you probably want to try to avoid that as much as possible if you can.
Yep, definitely. And it's, kind of another red flag for the organization as a whole. Like they're doing things and don't exactly know why they're doing them.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I've heard you touch on indirectly, probably me as well, is kind of the idea of the relative need between the parties. So not in all cases, as we were just discussing, you might have a company with a lot of relative need that's still conducting things this way. But usually, if you're being interviewed alongside a bunch of other candidates, you probably need that gig more than it needs you. Whereas as you sort of progress, and especially if you're growing and developing your business and starting to get really booked, once you're booked pretty solid, that need flips. And so you would find yourself, if imagine a scenario where you have a current client and then like 3 more lined up after that covering the next 2 years, and you just had all the work you could possibly handle. If another prospect called you up and said, we'd like to work with you, but you're going to have to, invert a binary tree on a whiteboard, you would just laugh. No, I'm not going to do that. So there is, and this is probably, if you're just starting out, sort of frustrating to hear, but if you keep your eye on the prize of getting a lot of bookings and making yourself in more and more demand, there is some natural relief on this kind of pressure where it's less of a slog.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, really, I think everything you've just outlined there is sort of a subset of just having the ability to say no to any given job. And, ideally you have the ability to say no because you've got so much other work that you just don't need to take this low quality gig. But sometimes having, a buffer built up in your bank account can also be a shield that allows you to say no to low quality work.
That's a great point. Yeah. Or, maybe having a spouse or a partner that has full-time steady work and is willing to support you while you get going.
Yep.
There's a lot of ways to do that.
Yep, absolutely. And so, something that I have advised to a lot of people that want to get into freelancing and want to start out is, build up a buffer of savings first. Stick with your full-time job, put some money in the bank, give yourself 3 to 6 months of runway that if you didn't pick up a single new client, you could still maintain your quality of life, because that gives you the freedom to turn down bad work, which gives you then the ability to say yes to good work, because you definitely don't want to get stuck in this vicious cycle of, okay, I'm taking what I know is bad work because I really need the money, and next time it'll be better, because when you get to the end of that gig, you're probably still going to be hurting for money. You're still going to be in the same place that you were, where you're going to be motivated to take bad work. And by taking that bad work, you're making it impossible for yourself to take better work. And so sometimes you just need to first turn down the bad work so that you have space to do the good work.
Yeah, and you're also, the more and more you do that, the more you're building up muscle memory of bad work habits. Mm-hmm. Getting used to, the feast and famine cycles and the putting up with bad clients and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Another thing that occurs to me, if you're looking to maybe tip the sales conversation or just kind of find contracts in a different way, is that you could start mentally exploring ways to sort of niche or get more focused. And I won't maybe go into that too much, but like, for instance, here's a way to think of it. If you're in a Stump the Chump interview, it's probably being administered by somebody whose title is architect, and they probably work at a company who has a lot of software developers. But what if you said, instead of, pitching to just any company that's willing to take on, somebody with Python experience or whatever it is you have, what if you said, I'm only going to focus on not-for-profits with less than 20 people working for them or something? Almost by definition, those companies would not have an architect or a team of developers. So almost by definition, they will not be conducting this style of interview, and you'll just immediately be having different sales conversations. They might still do some interview, or they might, bring in a consultant to interview you. I don't know, but you're not going to be doing something like this. You'll be having a different conversation. So you might niche based on the company, or you might say, look, if I engage with the VP of engineering directly, they're not going to put me through that. They'll just bring me in. So focusing on who you're marketing to can be a big help as well.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. I think you're right on that. There are definitely categories of clients that do stump the chump and categories that don't. And I think more often than not, when they do, that's a good sign that they're looking at you as sort of a digital assembly line worker. They're looking for people that they can just plug in and out of whatever the task is, and they're not really so much interested in critical thought and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I would say, philosophically anyway, I think over the course of time, whether you want to build a business where you stay highly technical, or whether you want to grow in a different direction, become more consultative, make an agency, like whatever the case may be, over the course of time, I would say you're naturally going to gravitate towards solving more and more business problems with whatever it is you're doing. So you want, I would, maybe there are some exceptions out there, but I think you always want to be learning and being able to engage more strategically with your clients and give them advice, whatever it is you're actually selling to them. And almost by definition, if you're engaged in this style of interview, they're probably not going to be looking to you for advice at any point. And this might not seem like super actionable, what I'm saying, and probably it's not, but it's something to pay attention to as your freelance career develops. Like, are you naturally starting to have perhaps more strategic conversations? And if you're not, why not? So that can be something to pay attention to as well.
Yep, absolutely.
So let's see here. We've kind of talked at the most tactical about like how you would handle an interview like that while it's going on, how you'd handle the process strategically, and then maybe how you get away from it. Is there anything we have yet to tackle on the subject here you can think of?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is probably, that you want to try to avoid these interviews if at all possible. And the best way to do that is to raise the value profile of what you're offering to your clients such that you're talking to people that are making strategic decisions instead of tactical decisions.
Yeah, I think, and if I could offer any kind of last parting or closing wisdom, it'd be kind of simple, which is just to like, if this is resonating with you and you're saying, yeah, how would I handle an interview like this, that it might be an opportunity for an inflection point where you can pull back and say, why am I finding myself in these situations? And could I imagine a way out? Like, could I imagine somewhere that I could go from here where this would no longer be true? And hopefully from listening to this, you're hearing that the answer is yes. Like neither Jeremy nor me nor anybody else who might be on this show wound up in this situation right out of the gate. Like over the course of a career doing freelance work, entrepreneurial work, whatever it may be, you drift away from this. It is possible to do. And it's not just us, like you can do it too. So maybe view this as an opportunity to kind of pull back and look strategically at what you're doing and perhaps set some goals and new strategy.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, I'd say it is then time for picks. You got anything for us this week, Jeremy?
I think I'm going to mention a book called Authority by Nathan Barry, in which he talks about how to build authority for yourself in ways that will help you be able to skip the technical interviews. It's about writing a book, making money from it, using that to kind of leapfrog into bigger consulting engagements. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there that a lot of freelancers could benefit from.
Nice. And for me, I didn't have anything prepared right offhand, but watch how seamlessly I do this transition with a little bit of a plug. If you want to build some authority, my agency, Hit Subscribe, we do write blog posts for dev tools companies. And truly, just like conference speaking is a great opportunity to build authority, so is writing blog posts and white papers. You can come write for us, and I will put the Write For Us link in the show notes. But even if you don't come and write for Hit Subscribe, putting content out there and building authority in that way can also be a powerful way to generate inbound leads and to showcase something during a sales conversation. So that is my pick for the week. And that's going to do it. Thank you, as always, for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.